Alright, a pen display this thin and this light should not feel this good to draw on, but it does. This is the Wacom Movink 13, and after using it properly for a while in different projects and within my workflow, I think it might be one of the most interesting devices that Wacom has ever produced. So in this video, I'm going to show you how it actually feels like work with this device, who is this Movink 13 aimed for, or like who is this really for, and a couple of things that I definitely think that you need to consider before you buy this product. Hey, what's up guys, Paulo Munoz here. Just a quick transparency note before we get started with this video. Wacom sent me this device to review, but as always, anything and whatever I say in this channel and in these videos, it is my honest experience, no filter, no fluff. If there is things that I consider to be really, really good, I will tell you about it. And if there's something that is not, I will also tell you about it. Now, having said that, this review is especially for artists who are thinking about getting this device and want to perhaps know how it actually feels to work with this creatively. So I'm not gonna go too deep into the, every spec of this tablet because, you can find that information in the product page and it's probably better explained than what I can do. What I want to give you is more of a real context so that you can decide if this fits your workflow or if it doesn't. And at the end, I will share my full verdict, what I love about it, what I think could be better, and what it might be a deal breaker depending on who you are or how you work as an artist. Let's get into it. All right, let's start with what's in the box. You get the Movink 13 itself, a USB-C to C cable, and it's about 1 meter, which is fine. The Wacom Pro Pen 3, which I think is also fantastic, and it comes with a nib holder. And by the way, there are 3 replacement nibs in the pen as well. One of them is a standard nib, and the other ones are the felt nibs, which I think those are my preferred ones, plus a quick start guide and some, product information, and that's pretty much it. Pretty lean box. Now, I also got some extra accessories separately, and I think they're worth a quick mention. So I got the official Wacom stand, which is basically what I had already with my Movink Pad Pro 14. I also got a protective sleeve for the tablet and a small pouch to carry everything together, like the cables and the pen and all that. However, none of these accessories come in the box. You will have to buy them separately. And again, I'll come back to this in the verdict because when you start adding up the price of all these accessories, it kind of like it adds up and it matters. All right, so first impressions. This thing is beautiful. The build quality is really impressive. It doesn't feel plasticky at all. It is incredibly light, like it's really, really light, and yet it feels very solid and premium in your hands. That combination of something being really thin, very light, and genuinely kind of like sturdy and solid is hard to pull off, and I think Wacom nailed it here. In terms of the specs, as I said, without going too deep, it is a 13-inch OLED display, which is awesome. 2 buttons on each side of the tablet, and the Pro Pen 3 that has 8,192 levels of pressure sensitivity. You don't need that many, but they are in there. The display itself is sharp, vibrant, and the blacks are really deep. And we'll see how all of this feels in actual practice in just a moment. All right, let's talk about the setup. If you have a laptop or a PC with a USB-C port that supports DisplayPort or Thunderbolt 3, all you have to do is plug in one of the ends of the cable into your Movink and the other into your PC or laptop. Single cable, done, that's it. Now, here's something really important, and I want to be very clear about it because it's not a minor thing. Not every USB-C port can actually send video signal and power at the same time. So if yours doesn't have that feature, you cannot use this without an adapter, specifically the Wacom Link. So before you buy it, check your specs. This is listed in the Wacom system requirements, by the way, so you can check that out. But it's easy to me, so, double check that. The only reason I mention this is because it would affect whether or not this works straight out of the bag. Now, this is the case for my computer. So I also got the Wacom Link, and that is just basically a small adapter box that lets you connect the HDMI cable, a USB-C port for data, and a USB-C for power. And then a single cable runs from that little box into the Movink. It sounds more complicated than what it is, and it feels like a lot of cables, but for a static desk setup, it works really cleanly because all those cables hide behind your desk or underneath your desk, and all you see is a single cable going into your tablet. But the point is, factor that in before you buy it. Now, let me show you how I set up my Movink 13 in my desk. I'm using the official Wacom stand, which gives me a really natural and comfortable angle for drawing or for sculpting. And I do have 3 monitors. One of them is actually a Cintiq-level, plus a small screen sitting on top. I added the Movink 13 as my 5th screen, and I positioned that below my main center display. And like I said, once it's plugged in, everything works straight out of the bag. No color adjustment, no pen calibration. I just plugged it in and started working. That zero friction at the start is something that I really appreciate. The last thing that you want when you get a brand new device is to spend an hour tweaking settings before you can actually create anything. Now let me show you how it feels with something like ZBrush, which is one of the tools that I use the most. And this is where I want to spend a little bit more time because for me as a sculptor, this matters a lot. The response that you get when you use this device is immediate. There is virtually no lag at all. Every stroke lands exactly where you want it with the exact amount of pressure that you're putting into it. So when you are building surface details or doing micro sculpting, chiseling forms, that sort of thing, that level of precision matters and it creates a real difference. It's kind of like you're not second guessing whether or not the tablet caught up with the stroke or not, you're just sculpting. The other thing that I should mention though is that the screen texture plays a huge role here too. I genuinely think that it feels like drawing on paper, like traditional paper, because it just has the right amount of resistance under the pen. It doesn't slide, it grips well, and that gives you a lot of control, especially on tight detailing work, where basically a slippery surface could really affect how you draw a straight line, for example. So after a while, you stop thinking about the technology itself and the device, and then you get fully into this creative workflow. And that's exactly what you want from a tool like this. Or at least this is what I think is valuable as a tool to help my creative flow. Now let me show you something in Photoshop, because the OLED display of this device deserves its own moment. If you open up a vibrant image or something that has a lot of colors, everything just pops. The blacks are generally deep and rich, not that washed out gray that you sometimes get in a lot of the displays. The colors are accurate and vibrant, and the display comes pre-calibrated from the factory, so you're not spending time fussing around with color profiles and all of that stuff. You're just literally working. For any kind of painting, concept art, or color work like color grading, this display is a real treat. Now, let's talk about something that I think is worth flagging depending on what type of software you use. 13 inches is great for portability, right? But certain applications, like Substance 3D Painter, for example, the working area can feel a little cramped, especially if you're running it in a window with all the panels visible. The easy fix, of course, is the full screen mode, and most apps support it. And to be honest, this is actually how I use Substance Painter most of the time. It will open up the space straight away, and it makes the 13-inch screen feel a lot more comfortable. But here is where it becomes really powerful. And this is one of the things that makes a big difference once you take a few minutes to set it up. So if you're working full screen and want quick access to the actions that you use the most without, hunting through a bunch of menus and remembering complicated shortcuts, you should definitely be using Wacom radial menus. Let me show you how I set up mine in the Wacom Center for Photoshop. I basically mapped the most essential actions, the things that I generally use the most, into a single radial menu, like undo, redo, merge layers, full view, actual size, all of that good stuff. And all of this is accessible from one single button on my Pro Pen 3. So I basically map that radial menu to the third button of my pen. One press of that button and the menu appears. Pick your action and back to work. Now, one thing I want to flag, because you might miss it at first, is that inside the Wacom Center, there is this little checkbox when you are setting up your own radial menu or grid menu that would allow that menu to appear right under the cursor in your screen. By default, the option is not enabled, so make sure that you turn it on. Without it, the menu that you created appears in a fixed position, which I think it feels a little bit awkward depending on how you're working. With this enabled, it just feels completely natural. Now, the next thing that you might be wondering is the touchscreen. And yes, this device has touchscreen and is really, really responsive. Now, Wacom has also added palm rejection, which works really well too. So if you're someone who uses touchscreen in your workflow, you're in for a treat. Personally, I don't use the touchscreen as much for my 3D work because it just doesn't behave the way that I expect in a 3D environment. But I do use it for one specific thing that I absolutely love. So if you press any of the buttons on each side of the Movink 13, it will bring up this panel with these sort of virtual buttons, and you can toggle on and off the touchscreen from this virtual button right here. So here's the trick. I kept a full screen PureRef window with all my reference images on a separate monitor. And what I've done is I mapped the Movink's touchscreen capabilities to control that monitor. So I can be sculpting or sketching with my pen and use my hand on the Movink screen to zoom in or pan my references on a completely different display. This is more of a Windows trick rather than a Wacom stuff. So I have a dedicated tutorial where I show you how I set up mine and how it works, so in case you're interested and want to, repeat the same kind of workflow. But honestly, it just makes the whole workflow really, really smooth without breaking the concentration. Now, speaking of the physical buttons, you can actually map one of the two buttons on the side of the Movink to any action that you want. And you can do that from the Wacom Center. And the way that you do this is from the screen menu that appears when you press any of the buttons, just make sure that you click or choose the tablet button option, and then you can assign whatever you need. For instance, you can map it to trigger the radial menu if you prefer, and that basically frees up one of the buttons in your pen, and you can use that for something else. Personally, I have the radial menu on the pen, and I kind of like it, and I'm already used to it. So instead, I've mapped the left button of the Movink to toggle display. And honestly, this is one of my favorite features on this device or anything similar. It's just a huge workflow enhancement. So let's say that I'm doing a paint over or editing an image directly on the Movink 13. But for whatever reason, I need to jump into another screen and maybe search for a reference or open a file or, maybe just do some sculpting or whatever the case might be. Normally, I would have to switch to the mouse to do that. But with the toggle display, the Movink remaps itself to a different monitor. So I can still use it as a tablet, but affect a completely different screen. No mouse needed. It just keeps you in the flow. That's another thing that is very important to highlight. Now, another thing that is worth noting is that Wacom has implemented what they call the Selective touch. And this is basically a specialized mode that disables the general touch input. So basically, you don't have any accidental finger painting or palm taps or anything like that while you keep this on. So when you have this on and you have the screen shortcuts active, like the radial menu, basically it turns off the touch for the screen, but it allows you to trigger the radial menu and anything else with your finger. Personally, I think it's a really smart feature, and it becomes especially useful if you decide to go for something like the grid style for the virtual buttons. This allows you to place a panel with shortcuts on the side of the screen if you want, and it will have the various actions that you set up for the app. And here's the cool part. All of these menus that you create are contextual, meaning that if you decide to switch applications, the shortcuts will automatically change to whatever you have set up in that specific application. This is one of those things that sound like a small detail, but once you have this set up, it will genuinely speed up your workflow. Now, I have already mentioned the screen texture when we were talking about the sculpting, but I want to come back to it for just a second because it also does something else that I find it really, really useful. The matte finish or the edge glass sort of texture that this device has helps you with reflections and glare. Even in a bright environment, you don't get that distracting kind of like mirror effect that you see in more glossy screens. So here's a quick test that I did, just moving this light around over the screen so that you can see exactly how it handles it. For anyone working near a window or in a bright studio, this is generally a quality of life improvement. So here's the thing. When it comes to pen displays and tablets, I think there are basically three types of artists. The first type, that's basically me on how I set this up, where artists have a full desktop setup, completely dialed in, maybe a large Cintiq on an arm, and everything is exactly where you want it so that you can sit down and start working, you just get into the flow straight away and, and continue working. Now, you might think that the Movink 13 has nothing to offer for this type of artist, but actually I think it does. Even though I have my full studio setup, I genuinely appreciate being able to pack this up and head to a cafe for, a change of scenery maybe, or take a longer family trip or something like that without having to fully disconnect from my work schedule. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because you get the same consistent Cintiq-level quality wherever you go. That flexibility is actually really valuable even if your main setup never moves. The second type of artist, they prefer a regular tablet. Just think about like an Intuos Pro or something like that. And there are incredible 3D artists that I know that simply they don't like to cover what they're doing with their hand. And that's one of the things that the Cintiqs or something like the Movink 13 does. And they have built their entire workflow around the fact that they're working with a simple tablet and they see the effect on the screen. And it works well for them. But there is something interesting as well for this second type of artist. Remember that toggle display feature that I showed you earlier? You can actually set up the Movink 13 app to work exactly like a regular tablet, mapping it to a different screen so that your hand never goes over what you're working on. And then whenever you need it, you can flip it back to display mode. So if you're an artist that fits that second category and you've always avoided pen displays for that reason, the Movink 13 might actually be worth looking into. And then there is the third type of artist when it comes to tablets. The artists who are always on the move, visiting clients, working remotely, traveling around the world, basically the nomads. And honestly, that's what the Movink 13 is essentially built for. You can take it anywhere with a compatible laptop and a single USB-C cable and get the full Cintiq-level experience again, all the accuracy, all the fluidity of the work, and the pressure sensitivity, all of that wherever you happen to be. All right, and here's my final thought. The Movink 13 is an absolute gem of a device. Probably one of the most exciting products I've ever tried from Wacom, and I know I said the same thing about the Movink Pad Pro 14, but it's true. Everything in the Movink family is fantastic. I own the Movink Pad Pro 14, and I've also reviewed the Movink Pad 11. Both devices are fantastic for the specific market. And if you want to compare options across the lineup of the Movink, those reviews are in the channel, so I'll leave a link in the description so you can check them out. Actually, if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, this might be a good reason too. I cover a lot of this kind of stuff alongside my sculpting tutorials, texturing tutorials, and all of that good stuff. But let's get back to the review. The Movink 13 is a fantastic device for that third type of artists, the ones who need that flexibility without compromising the quality. So if you already own a device like the Cintiq, the Movink 13 is probably not going to be a workstation upgrade, but it can absolutely be a workflow upgrade if you want that same consistent experience that you have in your Cintiq, but wherever you go. And if you don't have a pen display yet and you're thinking about getting one, this is a really strong option to consider. Now, let's be honest about the things that could be better, or the things that I found that could be improved a little bit. First, the price point is around $600 US. And for that price, I really wish that there was some kind of basic protective cover or like some kind of sleeve, maybe like a simple stand that come with a box, but it doesn't. The box is pretty lean in that regard. And when you start adding up the cost of each accessory, it will add up pretty quickly. My advice is, if you're already investing in a device like this and you're spending the money on this, just to spend a little extra to protect it. Even something basic, or you can find like generic cases, it's better than having it rattling around your bag and getting scratched because it is a premium device. The second point, and this is very important, if your PC or laptop doesn't have that USB-C port that supports the DisplayPort or the Thunderbolt 3, you will need a Wacom Link adapter. So this is kind of like a deal breaker if you don't have the right port. So make sure that you check it out. There's no workaround this, so you will have to buy the Wacom Link. As I mentioned, Wacom lists this in the system requirements. It's just easy to skip that part and don't read it. So if you don't have this type of USB-C port, you need to get the Wacom Link as well. So factor that in your budget. Now, the next thing that I should mention is the resolution. The Movink 13 is 1080p. For me, everything looks sharp and it's great at that resolution. I'm not complaining about it. But if you're coming from a 4K display or even like a 4K Cintiq, for instance, you will notice the difference, especially when you zoom in and do some detailing work. Now, this doesn't bother me personally, but if resolution is high on your priority list, it's worth knowing that this is only a 1080p display. And honestly, that is the full list. Just 3 things that I would push back on. Everything else on this thing just feels really, really good. The OLED display is fantastic. The build quality is very impressive, as I said, at least for how thin and how light this is. And with a compatible laptop or PC, the setup is generally one cable. You don't need anything else. The Pro Pen 3 is smooth, precise, and very responsive. The screen texture feels just like drawing on paper. Real resistant, and that obviously gives you real control. The color accuracy is solid straight out of the box. There's no calibration needed. Oh, and this is the thing that I forgot to mention during the unboxing. The pen actually stores the extra nibs inside itself. You can just unscrew the back and you'll find the 3 nibs, or like the holders for the nib, in there. So again, you can take it with you and the replacements are there with you. It's a really nice little detail, but it's easy to miss. Another thing that is worth knowing is that the Movink 13 is compatible with other Wacom EMR pens. So if you prefer the chunkier feel of something like the Pro Pen 2, which feels like a marker, you can use that as well. And Wacom says that it also works with third-party EMR styluses, so you have that option there too. So that's it. That's my full honest take on the Wacom Movink 13. And if you decide to go for this device, I have a full set of videos packed with tips and tricks for Wacom devices on my channel, and I'm going to leave a link so that you can go through those and hopefully find it useful. So go ahead and check those out. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.